Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley McManus, Director of Marketing at Affectiva. Welcome to Affectiva Asks, a human-centric AI podcast, where each episode we will interview thought leader doing cutting-edge work in the AI space. A little bit about us. Affectiva is the pioneer of in-cabin sensing AI, software that can detect nuanced human emotions, complex cognitive states, behaviors, activities, and interactions within next-generation vehicles. Today's episode features Affectiva CEO Dr. Rana Kaliouby moderating a panel of experts: Dr. Bryan Reimer, research scientist at MIT, Chung, Senior Business Development Manager at Veoneer, and Richard Schram, Technical Director at NCAP. This panel explored how AI and computer vision can aid in child presence detection, seatbelt detection, seat configuration, airbag deployment, and more. They also touched on multi-sensor approaches to developing advanced safety features and the importance of sensor placement, as well as the challenges car manufacturers and technology providers are facing as they bring these capabilities to market. Let's listen in on their interview to learn more about how Euro NCAP, MIT, Affectiva, and Veoneer are thinking about advanced safety features in the AI systems that fuel them.
Welcome, everyone, wherever you are joining us from. I am Rana Kaliouby, co-founder and CEO of Affectiva. If you don't know who we are an MIT spin-out on a mission to humanize technology. I'm excited to lead this conversation on optimizing road safety beyond driver monitoring. This is the second in a series of webinars we're doing around driver monitoring and in-cabin sensing with this awesome group of panelists. Welcome, everyone. And before we go further, let's have everybody introduce themselves. Richard, do you want to go first?
Yes. Thanks again for inviting us. Second time now. Richard Schram. I'm the Technical Director of Euro NCAP. We discussed last time on the driver monitoring systems, but we have more coming up for discussion today.
Hi, everyone. Chung from Veoneer. I am the Business and Feature Development Manager there. Ready to talk to everyone.
Brian, welcome.
Bryan Reimer from MIT, lead the Advanced Vehicle Technologies Consortium, and do a lot of work in the human behaviors areas of active safety systems. Thank you, Rana and team, for inviting me.
Great. Welcome, everyone. So a few weeks ago, we did a session with this group. We discussed how Euro NCAP is influencing the development of driver monitoring systems. And some of the themes, I wanted to just summarize kind of some of the themes that we covered. First and foremost, how Euro NCAP is kind of spearheading all of this and the roadmap and the timing of bringing these requirements to the market. The use of AI in detecting different states of driver impairment. Brian, I definitely want to build up on that a little bit more because you're all about driver engagement and kind of advanced driver monitoring. So I want to make sure we cover that topic today as well while we have you. We covered some of the challenges of using AI and testing AI-based safety systems. What does that look like? Obviously, strategies for data collection. And again, great to have you, Brian, and be part of this conversation today because I want to talk about data consortiums and how can we bring that to effect. And obviously, the effect of the pandemic on data collection. And we talked about some of the ways we've all pivoted to change and to continue to do data collection during the pandemic. And then we had a conversation around the placement of in-vehicle sensors. And I think that's a great kind of segue into the conversation we're having today, which is, okay, how do you take the focus off of just the driver and expand the scope of safety requirements? So I'm pleased to welcome our panelists to take part in this discussion. So there are more safety considerations beyond driver monitoring, and computer vision and AI are playing a key role in addressing these safety requirements. So I guess the first question is, what do we mean by advanced safety features, and how do we define that? Caroline, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, there's a lot of features themselves that are being discussed, but I think the crux of the definition is that anything that can reduce accidents, reduce fatalities, and generally make the driving experience and being in a vehicle safer at the end of the day, right? So I think today's conversation will bring a lot of seatbelt detection, maybe child detection, classification of the occupants, and even things like child seat detection.
Absolutely. Brian, how do you think about advanced safety features?
So I think of it kind of one step probably up the food chain to where Caroline does. I really think about it of any of these advanced features that can reduce risk. So preventing and helping to prevent the likelihood of scenarios that can lead to accidents or fatalities. So how do we prevent something that we don't want to happen? Something as simple as a hard braking event, while not terribly risky, but systems that can help prevent that lessens the likelihood of ever getting into that crash scenario.
Absolutely. Richard, how about you?
Well, not a lot to add there. I think we're all the same line. It's typically the before crash system that will help you mitigate, avoid the crash in general. But also in this topic, a relatively new one where we look at the vehicle parked and what does the car do afterwards. Keep on monitoring, even if the driver has left in a way, which is completely new.
Yeah, and I wanted to get your thoughts on how your NCAP is thinking about these safety requirements beyond driver monitoring.
Referring to in-cabin sensing, I think we have a long list of items already, starting with seatbelt reminder, where we are always technology neutral. So however you detect whether seatbelts are in use, it's up to the OEM and to the suppliers. And I think we can make a big step here and also benefit from combining different functions that we assess in Euro NCAP with single or multiple sensors, depends on what the quality you want. But certainly this is a first where we are going to look into full cabin sensing and knowing what's happening in the vehicle, not whether the seat is being occupied, but also who is in the seat,
Yep.
and are they still in the seat after the car has been parked, etc. So I think there's a lot of things we are combining with. Effectively, sensors are already in the car, apart, of course, from full in-cabin sensing, but you can combine older functions and you make use of these new sensors.
Yeah, that's definitely something we're very focused on at Affectiva, this concept of occupant sensing and seatbelt detection. And our people, are the occupants safely seated and being able to flag that and monitor that. Even things like airbag deployment, right? Is it safe to do that or not? And Caroline, like you mentioned, child presence detection is something that's top of our list as well. I mean, again, we covered this in the last session, but I think it's really important. Like once you're able to detect this and build a feature that can identify or flag these, safety requirements, how should the car respond? And I think that's really important. Bryan, do you have some thoughts around that?
So once we use the base sensing technology to detect some level of behavior in the car, that can be anything from not wearing a seatbelt or from picking up the phone, et cetera. The question becomes, what's the management and the queuing strategy that we use there? And that can be anything from alerts to escalation of alerting, to lockout, to arming the active safety systems and making them more sensitive. So it really depends on what environment we are in, perhaps what level of automation is being leveraged, and what is that behavior we're detecting. So, something like a child being left in the seat is a far different queuing and alerting management strategy than the fact that you're holding a phone up in front of you and there's a platoon of lead vehicles or traffic braking in front of you. So very much of how do we use the information of what's going on in that car to inform different management strategies of the automation and back to the driver or passenger driver exiting the car.
Can you give some examples of how OEMs think about that? We know from our work that there's a wide range of how OEMs want to engineer that.
Yeah, and some of that comes from that we, all of us on the phone today here are very different, and individual differences really dominate. And each manufacturer, whether you're a European manufacturer, American manufacturer, Asian manufacturer, has a different philosophy on how they'd like to queue and manage the driver or motivate the driver to do better. And, there's OEMs out there and within each OEM, different brands that feel they can push their drivers a little more to do the right thing. Super Cruise being one illustration of a really well-designed first-generation management system. Some of the alerting systems that will ping your cell phone work for some manufacturers, but that assumes that a phone is on your, person. On the other side, setting off an alarm on the outside of the car that there's a child in there, was quite aggravating and say, what did I do? And that doesn't make you too happy and brand friendly, your car. So there's a lot of different trade-offs in the individualization of these systems and philosophies across the globe. We don't know the answers to a lot of the questions that everybody wants. We need stronger data. We need to work together as an industry and collaborate on some of these really pre-competitive questions on where do we standardize, where do we push the consumer, and where does brand identity need to roll?
Caroline, how about you as a tier one? What role does Veoneer play in this, driving that strategy and working with OEMs on how the car should respond?
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything that Bryan said, that different regions have different approaches, and that also boils down to cultural differences. The way that Americans perceive things or act is different than the way that Europeans or Asians do. So yeah, the human factors is hugely important. But I think, and if anyone has been to CES or seen videos of our live vehicle, we take the carrot and the stick approach. So if it's the stick all the time, you're going to get people that hate the product, think that the system is purely punitive all the time and want to turn it off, right? It's not helpful. But if there's the carrot approach, so Bryan brought up the CT6 escalation strategy. They go from A1, A2, A3. So if someone doesn't respond to the first escalation, then you go to the second, then you go to the third, and finally you take away the benefit, the carrot, right, which is being able to drive hands off in their semi-autonomous system. So that carrot where you show the value of the system and the benefit to the person, I think is very important as you decide your human factor strategy.
So Richard, this is clearly a multi-stakeholder challenge, right? And we need a lot of voices around the table. So Richard, how do you go about including tier ones and tier twos and OEMs in the conversation?
Everybody just calls Bryan, and he will come.
That's great.
No, I think Euro NCAP heavily depends on industry knowledge and industry development, and we are more than happy to set our requirements based on what industry tells us and what they tell us is coming up as systems and what is feasible. And then, of course, that's let's say the first tier, second tier suppliers, and then we have the OEMs who need to be willing to implement this in their vehicle DNA or their OEM DNA. So our requirements will never be a very hard pass-fail criteria. We will always work and try to highlight the best performers, but also incentivize the lower performers who are, for cost reasons or other reasons, do not want to go for the full system as we would see the best system coming up.
And when we were preparing for this, one of the ideas that we floated around was whether there is appetite for maybe a one-day event where all the tier ones and tier twos come together and we basically share input with you guys, Richard. Yep. So Bryan, how about you? You've done a phenomenal job bringing together competitive OEMs, competitive tier ones as part of this consortium. So tell us how it all came about, and how are you able to bring competition together to sit around the same table?
So, Ron, that's a really good question. And a number of years ago, I think it's 7 or 8 now, we had the idea that there is a lot of pre-competitive work that needs to be done to enable the competitive juices of different tier ones, different OEMs, insurers, et cetera, to really, make stronger decisions. And we believed, or in particular, I was really fond of the idea that, look, if we could get industry to work together and talk where we can talk. I don't want anybody to talk about anything competitive, but it's amazing of how much we can communicate around a strong table and a neutral voice at MIT that wasn't occurring in the policy domains, wasn't occurring at SAE. And by coming together and understanding how drivers are interacting with some of this advanced technology, whether that's L2 systems or active safety systems, we can begin to fill in the holes in the foundation of our knowledge more strategically. And by doing that, enabling the different partners, and some are taking some of the data we're collecting and really setting design targets on at this point. Mm-hmm. Some are making some more advanced decisions. Some are modeling the data on their own. So enabling the partners to do more, but setting a foundation, filling gaps together. At the end of the day, a lot of the work we're doing, Veoneer and Caroline, her whole team could invest in doing it themselves. But does it make sense? There's some things that really make sense to share, to enable, and there's some things that have to be competitive. And now, 5+ years into this effort, where we're seeing some of the data we're collecting really bear fruit. It's really fun to watch some of our partners leveraging our data to set design strategies, leveraging our data to have conversations with customers, OEMs or suppliers, tier ones, insurers, and then some of it starting to reach back into how do we use third-party neutral data supported by the industry to better educate your NCAP, JD Power, Consumer Reports, IHS, and starting to get some push on can we talk to some of the key government stakeholders The German industry, for example, very, non-supportive of the philosophy that GM has taken with Super Cruise, but it's a philosophy in particular that, quite frankly, we need more data, but has as much merit as everything else that everybody's pursuing, but can't be tested on German roads.
Caroline, can you comment on your experience being part of the AVT consortium and what value you've gotten out of it so far?
Yeah, the data is definitely interesting. The research is definitely interesting. It's hard to fight a battle alone, especially when things like NCAP are being discussed, GSR and legislation is being discussed. So the more that the industry can have a holistic, agreed upon view, at least from a theoretical philosophy standpoint, the easier and the faster technology moves, right? And I think the really interesting part for me when I started attending the AVT meetings was that there's really a whole ecosystem that's present. So it's not only just tier ones, but also tier twos like Affectiva. You've got OEMs there, and even consumer reports is part of it, and insurance agencies. So you're bringing in people from different aspects and different stakeholders and seeing their perspectives too, which has been hugely interesting. So that type of discussion, and we have technology completely, separately on the West Coast that also is part of it too. So all of that discussion from the different aspects of it makes it a really, really interesting place to have that research being vetted between everybody and all the stakeholders. So yes, I'd say it's pretty valuable, and it has been for Veoneer.
And Caroline, what you're commenting on here is really, from my side, been the most exciting part, is listening to industry talk about neutral data. So if an OEM or tier one puts up data, everybody's, no one wants to critique a vehicle that their, customer's making. But we're putting up MIT data, and folks are really much more to talk about MIT data and discuss their feelings of what it means. And that has been so exciting to watch.
So let's jump into the data conversation, because we are often, especially when we're in conversations of our technology, getting sourced by various OEMs and tier ones, there is a lack of benchmarking data. And, the last session we had a conversation on whether Euro NCAP should spearhead that effort, but maybe it's a consortium like you, Bryan, that defines a standardized or benchmark data set that the industry can use to validate these features.
Yeah, and that's an interesting question, Rana, is that I think it's got to be a neutral party of some sort. And Euro NCAP is absolutely a neutral conglomerator. But I think the power of MIT is really important in global setting of a neutral platform for discussion. And it's something, the Institute's been very good at over the years, from everything from the World Wide Web Consortium, where you have hundreds of industries coming together, setting a neutral playing field. None of this is easy conversation. None of this has easy answers. We want it away from the policy side as best as possible, but we want to come and talk about the data. And MIT provides a very unique and appropriate place to do that without any of the worries of competitive principles, antitrust, and all the other things that define competitive practices. It's an academic institute, and we can collaborate easily with your NCAP and China NCAP if we need to, and sit in the middle, very, very much trying to be a neutral party, understanding and promoting the use of data.
Yeah, and what I find really, and we've been collaborating for a couple of years now, and what I find really amazing about this collaboration is not only do you have access to this incredible naturalistic data, right, that you're continuing to which is, of course, as everybody on this call knows, it's super expensive to collect and maintain, right, and annotate. But I also think you have the ability to build hypotheses with this data set and test it, right? And that's like taking a very kind of scientific approach and applying the scientific method to that data set has been interesting to be part of.
Yeah, and some of the folks on the team, Panina Gershon, Bruce Meller, and we've been struggling for 5 years and building this strong data set. And the work that they're doing at this point in analytical efforts and predictive efforts are going to be astonishing to watch. And as they move from consortia discussion over the last 18 months or so out to a couple pieces about in the public domain. And next 12, 18 months, I'd expect. And watching the modeling happening and the insight coming from this is really, really fun.
All right, so switching gears a bit, as we think about this broader in-cabin sensing play that's not just focused on driver, but additional safety features and maybe even personalization and comfort features as well. At Affectiva, we've built this hypothesis that the camera placement is going to evolve from the steering wheel column more towards a center high position, so rear view mirror, maybe roof module, depending on the car's configuration. And that would allow a broader view of all of the occupants in the vehicle and unlock all these additional safety and safety plus features. So I want to get everybody's thoughts on this camera placement theory. Richard, do you care about where the camera is?
No, effectively we don't. We don't even care whether it's a camera.
Yeah.
As long as you can meet the requirements that we set on whether you're able to detect certain facial directions, the attentiveness, drowsiness, people on board, however you do it, we don't really care. We just want you to be able to detect and to intervene or warn accordingly.
Makes total sense. Caroline, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, anyone that has worked with an OEM on packaging knows that it's a constant fight of where these cameras go, right? So if it was up to studio, they would have it buried somewhere where the functionality would be close to zero. So I do think that camera placement is critical, and we fight this every single day with where the camera goes and the trade-offs with KPIs. So there's definitely a balance that needs to happen. The inside rear mirror does offer a lot of benefits in that it expands the field of view and what you're able to see. But of course, like from our previous conversation, I think we mentioned it from a DMS aspect, it's not optimal, right? So what are those trade-offs? Can we accept those trade-offs? And does it still present enough functionality for the DMS system to kind of bolster the performance increase you get from the other vehicles and the other features? So I think it's an ongoing question right now that needs a lot more research.
Bryan, how about you? Do you have a point of view, and how are you, affecting that in your data collection protocols?
Yes. So interestingly enough, from the academic side, I get to say here, what's the best placement for what we're doing, as opposed to the complexities of where Caroline sits and the OEM sit of saying, okay, we have to drive cost out of this and optimize a lot more than we may want to. So, we've, in essence, done a lot of high instrument cluster mounting on top of the center stack, but the rearview mirror has a lot of potential. High mount dome cameras have a lot of potential. It comes down to a trade-off. What are you looking to detect, and how are you looking to manage or motivate based upon that? And the packaging questions are very complex. Moving wires and in moving locations, is not simple.
We only look at standard fit systems, so it's not a very expensive option that you can sell where cost may not be an effort. So Bryan was completely right. This is a feature that has to be in all of your vehicles for your NCAP to assess it. So that's really have to be the best trade-off. It doesn't say that cars on higher trims cannot have better systems, but this is really the base system where you want to have most functionality at the lowest cost.
And I think that's really important, Richard, is that by looking for optimal and inheriting the cost of optimal, we are going to be less willing to put it on the mass number of vehicles we'd like to get to. So how do we make good stepping stone movements towards the directions we want to go? And what may be a less optimal, more affordable placement now on 10 million vehicles is going to be a far better answer than a more optimal placement on 100,000 vehicles. And those are the big picture trade-offs that need to be thought through. Not looking to solve all the issues tomorrow, looking to work step by step in enhancing road safety and reducing risk.
Building a roadmap. Yeah. And obviously at Affectiva, we take a very kind of computer vision approach to solving a lot of these problems. But vision isn't the only, an optical sensor isn't the only approach to do this. So can we comment, maybe Caroline, you can take this one, on what are you seeing out there in terms of other sensors that are being explored and potentially deployed in vehicles?
Yeah, I think that the last few years have been really interesting in that sensors that were too expensive or not auto-qualified are starting to get closer there, right? The cost has gone down. We see auto quals. So DMS has opened up the near infrared camera system. I think it was a big hurdle for OEMs to even make the jump and put a near infrared DMS system in the vehicle. But now that there's a lot more discussion of, okay, the base system is there. If you add on different sensors, you can get a lot more functionality. So we're seeing time of flight for the distance, maybe some radars in there for heart rate variability or for the breathing. So there's a lot of different sensors that could come together as a suite to provide either redundancy or just more capability, more performance in addition to our direct sensing or DMS systems.
Can you comment on where these sensors sit on a cost spectrum?
Sure. Radars, it depends, right? What type of radar do you need? And do you need it throughout the whole vehicle? Or are you just looking for the front row? So time of flight, very expensive. There's only a few producers of time of flight systems out there that meet requirements and meet auto qualifications. So that's really the big hurdle right now. They're big, they're bulky, they're expensive. Radars, you could probably find some out there if you're just looking for is somebody breathing, are they not breathing? What is their general heart rate fluctuations? It's a lot cheaper than that. So, but again, like the past few years, we're starting to see time of flight systems become even cheaper and cheaper, and people figuring out the technology hurdles. So I think we're going to start seeing more time of flight enhanced systems on the market.
So because we're continuing to add these highly complex systems to the car, how can we be transparent to the consumer, and what does that look like? And I'll draw from a personal experience of mine. I was shopping for a car about a year ago and ended up with a car that has a time of flight camera. And I knew that the camera was there because it's gesture control enabled. So I knew that there must be some sensor in there. And I asked the sales guy and I said, oh, does this work? And he actually he either didn't know or he didn't disclose that there's a camera there. And it just struck me that we need a more transparent dialogue with the consumer and a lot more education. So how do we go about that? And what are the key questions and considerations to get to that transparent universe?
Yes. So officially we are a consumer organization. So I think our main goal is to inform consumers and on the other side, force manufacturers to put these systems on the vehicles to not be negatively published in a way. Mm-hmm. The hard part, there's a big dilemma there. You don't want to tell consumers, well, we put all these fancy features on your car, but don't do anything anymore. The car will take care of it. Will be, especially if you take it on the child presence detection, we will never guarantee, we will never state that it's a perfect system. And I think all we as engineers know it's never going to be a perfect system. So you always have to, there's always a role for a consumer and a driver itself, to their own responsibility. But if your car does a lot, and I think Bryan always mentioned this as well, and on the driver monitoring, keeping drivers engaged, we don't want the car to be seen as the responsible person to determine who is in the vehicle. No, it's always a driver, and the car will help you where it can. But it won't be bulletproof. Something will still happen. And I think that's always a dilemma we face. We want to shout that your car is really clever, but you don't want to shout because you don't want people to rely on it.
Totally rely on it. It's so interesting. Absolutely. Right.
One of the hard parts here is that as we increase automation, sensing is just a piece of the automation strategy, is that we do need a lot more education, and we need to build the safeguards for privacy and cybersecurity into that. And unfortunately, that requires a level of coordination among the industry that's really very difficult, and where we need policy to get involved with good political footprint, but ensuring transparency. So what do you mean there wasn't a camera? Every manual calls out there is a camera in your vehicle if there is, or there is an icon on the instrument cluster to be transparent when it's on or off. Data privacy principles that are not, guidelines that are, clearly defined and discussed globally. So if you get in a car in Europe and you get in a car in the US, that you understand the data is yours or it's not yours or what it can be used for. I'm not saying that policy should do this independently. It really needs to be public-private partnerships. And that's why I focused the TEDx talk here a year ago. We need to have that conversation, but we need transparency. The myth is we don't need education, and we do. We need a lot of education. And where does that come from? It can't come from the owner's manual or the sales staff. My car purchasing experience a year ago is no different than yours. I wanted automatic emergency braking. The dealer couldn't tell me if the car I was looking at had it or not. I'm using the phone a friend in the industry strategy to figure out, does this have what I'm looking for? That's not where we need to be. So we need standard communication. We need nomenclature. And we probably need significant government support for broad education and awareness of the technologies. It's not in the US, a OEM A or an OEM B issue. If we want to enhance safety, it's got to come from above all or involving all and really international marketing and trusted marketing.
Yeah, it's super fascinating. Caroline, what is your timeline for getting some of these advanced features out and kind of lining it up with the Euro NCAP roadmap?
DMS is out in production. There's a lot of DMS features out there. So I would say in the next year, 2 years, we should see a lot more features that are in the more advanced space coming out to start not only looking at the driver, but also the front row seats and also the second row seats, right? So child presence detection, I think, is one that's been in the public arena for a really long time. There's already systems out there for child presence detection. I think multiple OEMs have things where if your door was open in your back seat and you don't open it again, it says, hey, did you leave something in the back seat? Now there's different radars being added in. So I think you'll see that step more and more with DMS kind of paving the way and then more sensors getting added in the vehicle. So I would say near term for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to start wrapping up. One thing that we obviously think a lot about at Affectiva is how we test these systems, and data is a key component of it. But as you architect kind of the data set that you use to train, but also to validate, it's really complex, right? Because what do you consider as a core set of features, and then what do you consider to be to be an exceptional or kind of an outlier example? So how do we think about that in this advanced safety world? Take, for example, child seat detection or child presence detection. Caroline, how do you think we should think about the data we use to test?
Obviously the more data, the better, right? When you get into things like machine learning or deep learning, the benefit of that is you can really start getting edge cases, corner cases. So the more weird scenarios that you find, the better it is at the end of the day. So I think that's important for the data, but also I think when people start talking about complete replacement of existing technology, I honestly don't think that's
detection, right?
Yeah, right. A lot of people, it's a really enticing business case when you start saying, oh, we're going to take out the bladders, the mats, the seatbelt switches. And I think as an industry, we've got to be realistic as to the KPIs we can achieve from a seatbelt detection versus the KPIs we can achieve from the seat buckle, right? Well, maybe we'll get there one day, but we're not there now. So I think Richard maybe mentioned this before. It's got to be steps. We've got to say, what can we do now? What can we do as an enhancement? So maybe from the computer vision side, we can say, okay, we can detect that you have a seatbelt on, and we can also detect that you're wearing it incorrectly. We have people that do low riding where they tuck it under their arm, or they take their chest buckle or not chest seatbelt and they throw it behind their chest. Those are things that we can bring to the market and add enhancements. That replacement of existing technology is going to happen in the future, but it's really that iterative step. So I think that data will help us get to that iterative steps, but we've got to have that in mind while we're taking the data, that's the goal.
That's awesome. All right. So to wrap up, what advice would you give an OEM that, we have a few OEMs joining in today as they think about this roadmap around advanced safety features and unlocking kind of in-cabin sensing?
Yeah, so it's what we typically do, and this is a good timing at the moment. We are sort of finishing the protocol development for 2023 introduction, which is effectively now the end point of the current roadmap. So we are in deep discussions internally first on what topics we believe should be in our 2025 to 2030 roadmap. And what we typically do afterwards is to speak with, publish it first to industry, and then liaise with industry to see whether it's feasible, whether we're doing something strange, or whether it's they would direct us somewhere else. But at this point in time, I think we're really, if industry, and especially the second tiers, I guess, which are 5 to 10 years before a product introduction, if you want to steer us in a direction or inform us on and tell us what you're working about. So the information sharing is really important for us to understand what is coming up, so that we can push manufacturers to adopt these technologies, which will only improve the safety even further. But without us knowing it, we're obviously not working on those systems. So we need somebody else like you telling us on what is coming up and what cool safety features we can even put in our roadmap for introduction in 2025 onwards.
Great. Caroline,
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Richard said from a policy standpoint. The only thing I would add is a lot of what we do when we talk to OEMs is present the data and say, here are your hard hitters, right? Maybe there's 30 different features out there that you could possibly do with all these sensors, but what does the data and what does the research say is will make the biggest impact, and that's what we need to focus on now. So, Bryan, we use a lot of Bryan's data and the studies that he's done as part of AVT to really help us make those critical decisions on what makes the most impact now.
That's great. How about you, Bryan?
I think this industry in general needs to learn to balance collaboration with competitive more strategically. As we get more complex, it becomes cost prohibitive to do it alone. Mm-hmm. So where can we work together to solve and innovate on the foundations? And how do we take it to competitive practices from there? I think, some of the stakeholders are starting to understand that there's a lot of value from learning together around things that no one really understands. We're all making as best educated guesses as we can. And, we are at a revolution in how we live and move. And over the next century, the world is going to look a lot different in how we move around cities and how we move to rural America and rural Europe. But we got to learn a little together and we got to learn a little apart. And we need to balance that much more strategically looking forward.
I love that. Learn a little together, learn a little apart. I love that. So in closing, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Stay well and stay safe and stay connected.
This discussion had some great points. One of the ones I found most interesting was the what would the car do question around determining whether something is a safety concern and the vehicle adaptation or intervention that would follow. I encourage you to watch the full discussion as well as the prior event on driver safety featuring this group of panelists by navigating to our events page at go.affectiva.com/events and scrolling down to the past event section. We also provided a direct link in the episode description. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe to Affectiva's Human-Centric AI podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts for new episodes. We're also on social media, so please reach out to us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Affectiva to share any feedback you have on the show and weigh in on the discussion using hashtag #AffectivaAsks. Don't forget to rate us and comment with your feedback to help make the podcast more discoverable for others. Until next time, thanks for listening.